So hello and welcome to another in my wildly unpopular and rarely viewed series of videos talking about the countries of the world, this time with added beard. So stick around.
Hi, I'm Matt. Over the last 25 years, I've travelled a lot. I've lived in 5 countries on 4 continents. I've flown over 1.3 million miles. I've visited over 100 countries, every American state, but I'm nowhere near done. So hit subscribe to see where I go next and perhaps get some inspiration for your next trip.
I made a video linked to here and also down in the description where I talked about how many countries I thought there were in the world, and I came to a total of 236, of which I'd been to 113. A couple of the countries I talked about in that video are currently in the news. Nagorno-Karabakh, or Artsakh as it likes to be known, is technically still part of Azerbaijan, but is populated by ethnic Armenians, and there is some pretty nasty fighting going on between those two countries at the moment. The second is Somaliland, which I described as the least country-looking non-UN country on my list. It's generally recognised to be part of Somalia. Very recently it established diplomatic relations with Taiwan, which is the most country-looking non-UN country on that list. Not full recognition yet, but a step on that road. So making that video made me think about the places that I've been that I'm keenest to return to, where I've been that I'm not so bothered about, where I haven't been that I'm very keen to visit, and where I haven't been that will probably be the last places that I visit. Today I'm going to reveal my not been keen list. So 6 countries that I have not been to that I am keenest to visit. And perhaps this might inspire you when you're making your next travel plans. So I've picked 6 countries that are interesting and perhaps a little unusual. These may not end up being the actual next 6 that I visit for reasons of cost and convenience, but they are very, very interesting places to talk about, and I hope it'll make for an interesting video. So number 1 on my list is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia may not be a popular choice, and some may think that visiting there stretches the boundaries of what's reasonable given the actions of the government over the last few years. I've said before that I try and avoid politics when talking about travel, and for me visiting a place is all about the people there rather than the politicians that govern it, and there really is no substitute for seeing a place for yourself. So although I readily accept that it may not be everybody's decision, I would visit the kingdom, as and when the current shenanigans pass, of course. Up until recently it would have been very difficult to visit as a tourist. Muslims have always been welcome, but up until recently only a handful of companies have offered cultural tours to non-Muslims which allowed access but were fiercely expensive. In 2019 the rules changed and many nations can now apply for a visa, even a visa on arrival. Still not cheap, but you can now get in. Jeddah is seen to be a more interesting city to visit than Riyadh, as it does have an old town and some interesting water to look at, although every capital city is worth a day of your time. So I'd probably plan to visit both. I'd absolutely love to visit Mecca, but as a non-Muslim being allowed into the kingdom is probably going to have to be enough for me, as I don't see them lifting the restrictions on non-Muslims visiting their holy cities anytime soon. Saudi Arabia is a geopolitical titan for a number of reasons, and I would love to go and see the place for myself. So that's number 1 on my list, Saudi Arabia. Number 2 is Georgia. I had penciled in a trip to Georgia and its neighbour Armenia for earlier this year, but as with a lot of things, it never happened. Tbilisi is a charming old city with a picturesque old town down by the river as it winds through a gorge. Batumi is a seaside town that is reachable by direct flights from Luton on Wizz Air, in normal times at least. Georgians are believed to have invented wine, which makes it an eminently suitable place to visit, if you ask me. In 2017, it was voted the 7th safest country in the world to visit, with friendly people and welcoming hospitality. It's visa-free for citizens of 94 countries, so what's not to like? Number 2 on my list is Georgia. This seems like an opportunity to invite you to like the video if you're enjoying it, to subscribe if you're new. Most of my viewers aren't subscribed, so please subscribe, and also to leave me a comment. I'd love to hear from you. And if you're interested in how I make these videos, I've put links to the equipment that I use down in the description below, so go check it out. Number 3 on my list is East Timor. Didn't see that one coming, did you? Let me explain. I moved to Australia in 1999 and became an Australian citizen a few years later. Australia has a very special relationship with the Timorese dating back to the Second World War, where the Allied forces, which were predominantly Australian, fought with the Timorese against the Japanese in the Battle of Timor. The Australian concept of mateship is well known, and Australia considers the Timorese to be their mates because of the support that was provided during that conflict. So much so that Australia was instrumental in extracting East Timor from Indonesia in the 90s, leading to its independence. More personally, I was lucky enough to secure tickets to the opening ceremony of the 2000 Sydney Olympics. I assumed when I got the tickets that I'd just sell them and make some money, but as the ceremony got closer and closer, I realised that I'd have few opportunities in my life to go to something like that, so I ended up going, even though it ended up being the most expensive day out of my life. And even though East Timor was still too young a country to have an Olympic committee, 4 of its athletes were allowed to compete under the Olympic flag. When they marched into the stadium, the place went absolutely mental. It was really an emotional moment. If you watch an Olympic opening ceremony on TV, you probably fast forward through the parade of athletes because it is a bit long and it is a bit dull. But I tell you, when you're in the stadium, it is the absolute best bit of the ceremony. Its equatorial location makes it a pretty interesting place to visit, and Dili is an attractive coastal town, even if Timor-Leste, as it likes to be known, is a developing country and does still face some challenges. I've wanted to go for 20 years since that opening ceremony, and that's enough to put East Timor at number 3 on my list. That's 3 countries now in Asia, so let's change continents for number 4, which is Cuba. The long-standing US embargo on Cuba, not to mention the prevailing mood of the occupant of the White House, mean that for many years cruise ships have rarely stopped on the island, and there have been severe restrictions on direct flights there from the United States. That means that despite it being a large, diverse and very interesting country right on the United States doorstep, it's always been very, very tricky to visit, which means it's never got to the top of my list. When you're in Key West in Florida, as I have been on a couple of occasions, you're actually closer to Cuba than you are to a Walmart. Havana is one of the 3 most important colonial cities in the Caribbean, alongside Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic and San Juan in Puerto Rico, both of which I visited and both of which I thoroughly enjoyed. It's hard to think of a more interesting country in the region, and although Havana grabs the headlines, there are plenty of very, very interesting places in the country to visit. Plus the place has a very strong beach, cocktail and cigar game. Another country where the actions of the government may lead some to question the appropriateness of a visit, but I'm very, very keen to go. So number 4 on my list is Cuba. Number 5 is Namibia. Africa is probably my least visited continent, and there are many, many candidates for inclusion on this list. I could easily have picked South Africa, or Botswana, or Mozambique, or pretty much anywhere, but I've picked Namibia for 3 main reasons. Firstly, it's one of the more interesting countries in southern Africa from a historical perspective. Through the colonial era, it had German, British and South African stewardship, which has produced a very interesting blend of cultures that is, I think, unique in that part of the world. Secondly, it's a special place geographically. It has the driest climate of any country in southern Africa, and also one of the lowest population densities of any country in the world. It has a very broad range of wildlife, and a developed enough tourist infrastructure to allow people to access it. And thirdly, for years, when I've been in a market or a tourist site, and people have pestered you with where you from in an attempt to sell you their tat, I've generally answered Namibia. It generally does a great job of shutting people up because they don't know whether it's some exotic country they've never heard of or whether it's some hideous insult in a language they don't understand. So it would be nice to spend some time in Namibia, as I've claimed to have been from there for decades. So number 5 is Namibia. There were plenty of candidates for number 6. I could easily have picked Argentina. I was pretty close to choosing Pakistan, but in the end I decided to go with a country that is actually a little bit more achievable than most of those on this list so far, and certainly those 2. So number 6 on my list is Serbia. Serbia is the 3rd closest country to where I live that I have not yet visited. The Faroe Islands and Bosnia are both slightly closer, but Serbia was very nearly the 14th country I ever visited. After university, I got a job with Arthur Andersen, may they rest in peace, and the very first schedule I received on my very first day there included 2 weeks working at the Hyatt Hotel in Belgrade. I was quite excited by this, as you might imagine, but Serbia, or the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, as it was known at the time, was in some turmoil, and the client was either unable or unwilling to pay for the insurance needed for us to visit, so the project never went ahead. And I've wondered ever since what I missed. Obviously, things have changed a lot in the 28 years since I nearly went. Gulp. But Belgrade is now a cosmopolitan city with a great food scene, some banging nightlife, some pretty interesting sights as well, all of which are fairly inexpensive if you're travelling with pounds, euros or dollars in your pocket. Not that banging nightlife is necessarily top of the list of things I look for in a place these days, but you get the idea. So number 6 on my list is Serbia. So I hope that was interesting, and I hope I've given you some places to think about when you're planning your next trip, or even dreaming about where you may go when all of this is over. So give this video a like if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe if you're new. Leave me a comment. I'd love to hear from you. And I look forward to seeing you all again in the next video. Goodbye.